The sound of the slap echoed in the marble hall, sharp, humiliating, final. For a moment, everything froze. The men around the table stopped breathing. Even the chandelier seemed to flicker in disbelief. Her cheek burned, but she didn't flinch. Not in front of him. Not in front of the man who had built his empire on fear. He stared at her, daring her to move, daring her to show weakness. But she just looked back, calm, silent, and dangerous. Somewhere deep in her eyes, something dark came alive. Outside, rain crashed against the glass windows of the estate, a violent soundtrack to what had just begun. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like clock hands counting down to something inevitable. The guards didn't dare stop her. No one ever left Don Matteo's table like that, not alive at least. But she wasn't just anyone. She was Elena Rossi, and this time she had nothing left to lose. That night, she stood alone on the balcony of her apartment overlooking the city. The same city her family once ruled before Matteo's men bled them dry. The lights shimmered below like 1,000 ghosts whispering her father's name. She pulled a gun from the drawer, its metal cold against her skin. Her reflection in the window looked different, harder, sharper. The slap had done something no bullet ever could. It had woken her. The city stretched endlessly beneath her, full of neon promises and broken souls. Every streetlight flickered with memories. Her brother's laughter, her father's voice, her mother's screams when they came for them. Matteo had taken everything and called it business. That night she made a vow to herself. She wouldn't rest until he knelt in the same dirt he buried her family in. In the streets below, engines roared. Matteo's men were celebrating another deal, another night of power and money. But power, she knew, was fragile. A glass empire built on arrogance. And she was ready to break it, one crack at a time. The next morning, she returned to the old cafe in the East District, a forgotten corner of the city where she used to meet her brother before he disappeared. The signboard hung crooked. The smell of burnt coffee and dust filled the air. Behind the counter stood Luca, an old friend with eyes that had seen too much. Elena Rossi, he muttered, almost afraid to say her name aloud. You shouldn't be here. Matteo's men... I know, she interrupted. That's why I came. He studied her, the way her hands didn't shake, the way her gaze cut through the smoke like a blade. There was no fear left in her, only purpose. She handed him a small envelope. Inside were photos, documents, bank accounts, Matteo's secrets. The kind of evidence that could burn his empire to ash. Where did you get these? He whispered. From the same man who thought slapping me would end my story, she said coldly. Luca looked up sharply. You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. Matteo doesn't lose quietly. I'm not playing, she replied. Not anymore. For years she had been silent, watching from the shadows, pretending to be broken. But while Matteo believed she was mourning her family, she had been rebuilding her reach, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. She had bribed his accountants, blackmailed his bodyguards, traced his shell companies. Now everything was in motion. Later that night, she sat in her car outside a quiet warehouse by the river. It looked abandoned from the outside, cracked windows, rusted doors, but she knew better. Inside, Matteo's men were counting cash, loading crates of weapons, running the arteries of his empire. She checked her watch, 11:47 p.m., right on time. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the detonator switch, but her eyes stayed steady. A faint click, then silence. For a few seconds, she thought it hadn't worked. And then, thunder. The explosion tore through the night, lighting up the river in violent orange. Flames reached the sky as steel beams collapsed and men screamed into the darkness. From across the bridge, Elena watched the fire spread. The reflection of the flames danced in her eyes, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had finally begun. The next morning, the city woke to chaos. News channels called it an accident, a fuel leak, a gang dispute, unconfirmed explosions near the docks. But those who knew the streets knew better. Matteo's empire had just taken its first hit in a decade. He stormed through his mansion like a wounded animal, shouting orders, threatening lives. Fear spread faster than smoke. For the first time, His men whispered a name they hadn't spoken in years, Elena Rossi. But she was already gone, moving like a ghost through the cracks of his city. She switched cars, changed phones, disappeared into alleys that no one dared to enter. Every step she took was calculated, every move planned. Her revenge wasn't just about killing Matteo. It was about unmaking everything he had built, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but dust. That night, she sat on the rooftop of an old apartment, the wind cold against her face. She could see the distant smoke still rising from the warehouse she'd destroyed. Her heart pounded with a strange rhythm. Not fear, not joy, but something in between. She remembered her father's voice from long ago, calm and steady. In this world, power doesn't come from money or bullets. Elena, it comes from the silence after everyone stops underestimating you. She looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Then let them hear my silence." Below her, the city buzzed with sirens and rumors. But somewhere inside that chaos, Elena Rossi had already become a name whispered with equal parts fear and respect. And deep inside the marble mansion on the hill, Matteo De Luca poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the burning skyline. His reflection in the glass looked older, smaller. He didn't know whether to laugh or rage. One thing was certain. He'd just made a mistake he would never recover from. He had created his own executioner. Matteo's rage came like a storm no one could stop. Inside his mansion, glass shattered, bottles exploded, and servants pressed themselves against the walls, praying the fury wouldn't find them. He'd ruled this city for 20 years, and now, because of one woman, it was starting to crumble. He'd seen enemies fall, lieutenants betray, cops turn corrupt, but this was different. This was personal. When dawn touched the skyline, Matteo stood before the charred ruins of his warehouse at the docks. The air still smelled of smoke and iron. Every flicker of flame was a reminder that someone had dared to touch his empire. He pulled his coat tighter and whispered her name like a curse. Elena Rossi. Behind him, Rico, his second-in-command, cleared his throat. "We found traces of C4, boss. Professional job, not some street gang." Matteo turned, his eyes wild. "Professional? She was my student. She learned from me. If she's back, I'll rip this city apart until she's ash." But even as he spoke, something in his voice cracked. Fear. Because Matteo knew what Elena was capable of. She didn't fight wars. She dismantled them, piece by piece, until no one even remembered how they began. While his men searched the alleys, Elena was already moving deeper into the underbelly of the city she once helped him build. In a safe house beneath an abandoned church, she spread blueprints across a table lit by a single bulb. Luca stood beside her, still nursing the bruise on his shoulder from the last explosion. "You're getting reckless," he warned. "That fire drew every cop in the district. Matteo's men will tighten the streets." Elena didn't look up. "Good, let them. The tighter they pull the net, the easier it'll break." She marked another red circle on the map. Matteo's casino, the Grand Plaza. The building glittered at the city's heart, the crown jewel of his empire. Money laundering, political deals, secrets, everything passed through those marble doors. If she took it, Matteo would lose his soul. Luca shook his head. "You're planning to walk straight into his lion's den." "I'm planning to burn it from the inside," she said calmly. For 2 nights they prepared. Forged IDs, casino floor schematics, fake jewelry, transmitter codes. Elena's team, a small handful of loyal ghosts from the old Rossi network, worked like surgeons in silence. She spent hours rehearsing her disguise. Black velvet dress, silver hairpin, steady smile. The woman in the mirror no longer looked like the daughter of a murdered boss. She looked like the storm Matteo never saw coming. When the night finally arrived, thunder rolled over the city like a warning. Neon lights reflected in puddles as luxury cars lined up outside the Grand Plaza. The air smelled of money and perfume, danger and arrogance. Elena stepped from a taxi, her heels slicing through the rain-soaked pavement, her diamonds catching the glow of the street lamps. No one recognized her. That was the beauty of power. It never looked down long enough to remember the faces it destroyed. Inside, the casino was alive with sound. roulette wheels spinning, laughter spilling from champagne-soaked mouths. She felt invisible among them, like a ghost haunting the living. As she walked past the gaming tables, she slipped her hand under the green felt, securing a small silver device. Then another beneath a poker counter. Each one blinked faintly, tiny heartbeats counting toward collapse. Luca's voice murmured in her ear through the calm. All clear. Cameras looping. 6 minutes until extraction. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the slot machines. She moved toward the cashier desk, sliding the last device behind a mirrored column. Then she stopped, every hair on her body rising. Did you really think I wouldn't see you coming, cara mia? The voice froze her. Matteo stood at the top of the grand staircase, tuxedo immaculate, a scar burning down his cheek. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a predator who finally smelled blood. Around him, guards closed in, hands resting on pistols. Elena turned slowly, her face unreadable. You look tired, Matteo. The city's starting to weigh on you. He laughed, a deep, hollow sound that silenced the room. You think blowing up my warehouse makes you strong? You're still the girl I pulled from the gutter. Maybe, she said, stepping closer. But you taught me too well. And you forgot the first rule of survival. Never humiliate someone who has nothing left to lose. He raised his hand, the same gesture that had struck her days ago. But before he could move again, the chandeliers flickered. Luca's voice cut sharply through her earpiece. Now, Elena! A heartbeat later, the first explosion roared from the basement. The ground shook. Panic surged. Gamblers screamed as marble tiles cracked beneath their feet. Glass rained from the ceiling. Alarms wailed. Fire ripped through the corridors. Elena darted through the smoke, shoving past bodies. Matteo shouted orders, firing blindly, but the chaos swallowed his voice. Flames licked the velvet curtains, painting the air red. She turned just once, seeing him through the haze, still alive, still furious, clutching the banister as his empire literally burned around him. A beam collapsed, separating them in a storm of sparks. Her ears rang, lungs burned, yet she kept running. She burst through the back exit into the rain, coughing, trembling, blood streaking her temple. The night air hit her like ice. Behind her, the casino was an inferno, its reflection blazing in the puddles. She leaned against a lamppost, fighting the urge to collapse. Luca's car screeched to a stop beside her. Get in! They drove in silence through deserted streets. Only when the sirens faded did she finally speak. He's still alive. Luca glanced at her, startled. After that? Impossible. Elena shook her head, watching the burning sky behind them. Men like Matteo don't die in fire. They crawl out of it. By dawn, the news spread across every screen. Massive explosion at the Grand Plaza Casino. Officials blamed a gas leak, but the underworld whispered the truth. Matteo De Luca's fortress had fallen. Rival families began to stir, sensing weakness. In a dim workshop later that morning, Elena cleaned the blood from her hands while Luca patched a cut on her shoulder. You've started a war, he said quietly. I didn't start it, she answered. I'm just ending it. Across the city, in a half-burned chapel on the outskirts, Matteo sat surrounded by the few men who hadn't fled. His once perfect suit was torn, his face blackened with soot. The rage in his eyes burned hotter than the flames that had almost killed him. She wants a war? He growled, crushing a cigarette between his fingers. Then she'll get one. Bring every contact, every soldier. We take back this city brick by brick. The surviving men nodded, terrified but obedient. Matteo looked out through the cracked stained glass window at the pale dawn. The streets of his kingdom were waking up, but for the first time, they no longer felt like his. Back in her safe house, Elena stood at the same window she'd used to watch the city years ago. Smoke still curled on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Matteo was alive, gathering strength. She could almost feel his heartbeat across the miles, a drumbeat calling her name. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, the storm isn't over. And she was right. Because when monsters like Matteo De Luca and ghosts like Elena Rossi collide, peace isn't an option, only destruction. The city didn't sleep that week. It held its breath. Every alley, every dark corner hummed with whispers. Matteo De Luca had survived, and Elena Rossi was back from the dead. The storm that had been brewing for years had finally broken. Police sirens wailed like ghosts over empty streets. Rival gangs fought for scraps of Matteo's territory, and ordinary citizens stayed indoors after sunset. No one wanted to get caught between two legends who'd built the city's bones from blood and fire. Inside an abandoned railway station on the edge of the river, Elena studied a holographic layout projected across the dusty floor. Her team surrounded her, Luca, Sofia, and two new faces from the southern docks. Every move was calculated, every breath deliberate. "This is it," Elena said, her voice low but steady. "Matteo's regrouping in the old chapel. He's lost half his men, but the ones he still has are the ones who'd die for him. If we hit him there, it ends tonight." Luca frowned. "You're walking straight into his den again." "The man's desperate now, Elena. Desperate men don't think. They burn." Elena's eyes flickered, a hint of something softer beneath the steel. "I'm counting on that." The plan was simple but suicidal. While Sofia jammed communication lines, Luca would handle the getaway vehicle. Elena would go in alone. She knew Matteo wouldn't run. He'd wait for her, the way a wolf waits for the only prey worth dying for. Outside, rain began to fall again, soaking the cracked pavement in silver light. As Elena loaded her weapon, Luca stopped her at the doorway. "After this?" "What then?" She paused, hand on the doorframe. "Then maybe I can finally breathe." The night swallowed her words as she disappeared into the storm. The chapel loomed in the distance like a ghost of faith long forgotten. Its steeple was broken, windows shattered, and ivy crawled up its stone ribs. Inside, candlelight flickered against walls stained with soot from the casino fire. Matteo sat near the altar, gun in hand, eyes half closed. He wasn't praying. He was waiting. When Elena pushed the doors open, they groaned like dying animals. Her footsteps echoed against the cold floor. Neither spoke for a long time, their silence heavier than gunfire. Finally, Matteo broke it. "You should have stayed gone, Elena. You could have lived. Started over somewhere no one knew your name." She walked closer, her boots crunching glass. "And leave the city my father built in your hands?" "No, you destroyed enough of him already." Matteo laughed, but it was hollow. "Your father was weak. He cared too much for loyalty. That's why he died. I made you stronger than him." Elena's jaw tightened. "You didn't make me stronger, Matteo. You made me numb." For a moment, the candlelight caught her eyes, and he saw something there. Grief, regret, maybe even the shadow of the girl who once called him mentor. It made him hesitate, just long enough for her to see the flicker of humanity he tried to bury. "Do you even remember that night?" she whispered. "When you shot him?" He looked away. "I remember everything." "Then you'll remember this." She raised her weapon. But Matteo was faster, always had been. The first bullet grazed her arm, knocking her back. Pain flared, but she didn't fall. Instead, she fired twice, shattering a candelabra beside him. Sparks showered, smoke rose, and the chapel filled with the echo of their war. They moved like dancers who knew every step, ducking behind pews, reloading in rhythm, eyes locked on each other. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, the thunder answered through gunfire. When her clip emptied, Elena dove behind the altar, breath ragged. Blood soaked her sleeve. Matteo's voice drifted through the smoke. "You were my masterpiece, Elena. My proof that I could mold chaos into perfection." She pressed her back against the cold stone, whispering, "Then maybe it's time your masterpiece destroyed its maker." She pulled a small detonator from her belt, a backup charge she'd planted earlier beneath the chapel's foundation. The red light blinked faintly. She didn't want to die, but if it meant ending him, maybe that was enough. But then she heard his footsteps, slow, dragging. Matteo appeared from the haze, gun lowered now, face bleeding, but his smile unbroken. "You think I don't know your tricks by now?" he said, kicking the detonator from her hand. "You're not the only one who plans ahead." He raised his weapon to her head. For a moment, everything froze. The candles, the rain outside, even time itself. Elena looked up, unafraid. Do it then. But understand this. When you pull that trigger, you don't kill me. You kill every part of yourself that ever believed in something pure. His hand trembled, just a fraction, but it was enough. From behind, a gunshot rang out. Matteo staggered, eyes wide in disbelief. Luca stood in the doorway, smoke curling from his pistol. Matteo fell to his knees, blood spreading across the cracked floor. You shouldn't have come back, he rasped. Elena crawled toward him, tears mixing with ash. Neither should you. She cradled his head as the life drained from his eyes. For a fleeting second, he looked almost peaceful, as if the war inside him had finally ended. Then his body went still. Rain began to pour harder, flooding through the broken roof, washing away the blood between them. The fire from the candles hissed and died. Silence filled the chapel, heavy and sacred. Luca knelt beside her. It's over, he said softly. Elena stared at Matteo's lifeless face, whispering, Nothing's ever over. Not in this city. She stood wiping the blood from her palms. Through the shattered window, the first light of dawn touched the skyline, a faint promise that maybe, just maybe, the city could heal. They left the chapel without looking back. Sirens wailed in the distance, but this time they weren't running. They were free. Days later, Elena stood on the same rooftop where her father once watched over the city. The streets below buzzed with new life. Construction crews rebuilding, kids chasing each other through puddles, old neon signs flickering back to life. Luca joined her, handing her a small box. Found this in Matteo's office, he said. Inside was a rusted lighter engraved with the words, Omnia vincit amor. Love conquers all. Elena smiled faintly. He never believed that. But maybe my father did. Luca nodded. So what now? She looked toward the horizon, wind catching her hair. Now we rebuild. Not as monsters, as people. The camera would fade slowly on her face, half in shadow, half in light, while the city breathed again beneath her, and as the music swelled, her voice would whisper the final line. The perfect closing note. When the world burns you down, don't rise for revenge. Rise to remind them you survived. If this story gripped you, hit subscribe for more tales where justice and vengeance walk the same shadowed streets.